I want to start off this morning by talking a little bit about the gospel. Some of you, anybody here ever heard of the Bible Project or Tim Mackey? Well, there's a video that you may have seen online where he talks about explaining the gospel. And I'll show you guys a picture of the way that the gospel is commonly delivered to people. And here's an image of it. Basically, a lot of times we look at the gospel this way, where it's like, okay, there's me, I live my life, I do a series of good, a series of bad, and at the end of it all, I either go to heaven or I go to hell. And the reality is that this is an inaccurate view, or at least not the best view of the gospel, but many of us view the gospel this way. Some of us in here might even be thinking, like looking at that going, yeah, no, that sounds right to me. You live your life and at the end you go to heaven or hell. That's the gospel. But there is a big flaw in presenting it that way, and we'll come back to it. But one of the issues with it reminds me of a guy named Theodore Roosevelt. Anybody ever heard of that guy before? Okay, he had a very strong personality, if you don't know that. He loved to have a good time. He loved being admired. He loved having control. He loved having a reputation for just being a big personality, right? Matter of fact, his daughter, Alice Roosevelt Longworth, actually said this about her dad. She said, "Father always had to be the center of attention. When he went to a wedding, he wanted to be the bride. When he went to a funeral, he was sorry that he couldn't be the corpse." Roosevelt liked to be the center of attention. Okay, he was a pretty self-centered guy. Not that everything he did was self-centered, but he liked being the core of what was going on in a room. And if we're honest with ourselves, right, all of us feel a little bit like that, right? And that's why when we look at an image like that gospel version that I showed you before, and when we hear that, we like that view, right? Because we get to see what happens to us. But the problem with that presentation is that it's completely focused on who? Me, right? I live my life, and at the end of it, I have a choice. I do good or bad. I go to heaven or hell. When that version of the gospel leaves out a very important character, God, right? It doesn't mention God even once when you give the gospel presentation that way. In reality, the gospel does not center on us because the gospel is actually God's story. The good news is God's story. And the good news is that at the end of everything, God wins. And while we get to be a part of God's story, it isn't actually all about us. So if you're following along with your sermon notes this morning, today's message is called Self-Centered. And we're going to be in Matthew chapter 20, looking at verses 20 through 28. And this is our final official message for this series, although next week is kind of an insert. You might think of it as kind of like an appendix at the back of the book kind of a thing. And then after that, we're going to celebrate Palm Sunday together. And that means the following week after that is going to be Easter. But today, we're wrapping up the core of this series, and we're talking about an overview of our vision, our church vision. And we've been talking about the 4 pillars of our vision, so by now I'm hoping you all can help me out with this. What are our 4 pillars? Connect. Great. Connect, grow, serve, influence. And these are the things that we should always be striving for as individuals in a very balanced way. We have to balance each of those things, right? If you don't have connect, which is belonging to a like-minded community of faith, you end up isolated from God's people. If you don't have grow, which is God's love flowing into our mind, being in strength, you're either missing out or burning out. And if you don't have serve, which is then that God overflows from us to others through sacrifice, you end up becoming a freeloader. And if you don't have influence, which is our lived response, which impacts our neighbors with God's love, you become insulated from the world. Well, today we're going to zoom out and we're going to look at how all of those things work together, okay? All those things work together. And the way this works for individuals is we're on 2 different axes, right? You have connect and influence. This is the time that you are spending somewhere. You're going to spend your time somehow balancing between your time at church and your time out in the world, right? You're going to balance between those 2 one way or another. And likewise, grow and serve oppose each other in that you have to make sure you spend enough time growing and letting God fill you so that you have something to overflow with into serving others, and you have to balance that out. In both of those cases, where you spend your time and how you spend your time, you have to balance it. And you might think of it this way. You might remember this from last time we did this series. We have an image of an airplane up there. Now, or not an airplane, but an instrument on an airplane, attitude indicator. And when you're flying, you want to balance some things, right? If you're looking at your instrument while you're flying a plane, you want to make sure you don't go too far up, too far down, too far left, or too far right, okay? And obviously there's more to it than that, but bear with me. If you're flying somewhere, say you're flying to Chicago, and you go too far left, you're going to end up in Texas, right? Very different. If you're trying to go to Chicago, you end up too far right, you're going to end up in Washington, D.C., right? Very different. Again, not where you want to go. You're going to end up off course. If you go too far down, well, usually you crash into a hillside or something. If you go too far up, you stall, and you crash anyway. So here's the thing. When you're flying, you want to balance the four directions, right, to try to maintain level flight, but there's one thing you never want to do in an airplane, assuming it's a regular airplane. You never want to be caught going backwards, right? So you balance the up, the down, the left, and the right. You balance that in the center, but you always want to keep pressing forward. Never a time to go backwards. And our walk with God looks that exact same way. Here's your first fill in the blank if you're filling in your blanks this morning, church. Being Christ-centered means taking a balanced approach to making progress, okay? Being Christ-centered means taking a balanced approach to making progress. So as Christians, we're trying to balance our connect, our grow, our serve, and our influence, but we're always moving towards Christ when we do those things. There's never a time when we want to be going away from Christ. And today we're going to talk about the idea of what happens when you stop that forward motion. You're not going towards connect because you're not in church. You're not going towards influence because you're not sharing anything with the world or growing in the world or anything. You're not moving towards grow because you're not seeking God, and you're not serving because you're just worried about yourself. Okay, if you turn away from all those things and go the other direction, you end up focusing not on Christ, you focus on something else. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 20, and we're going to witness an interesting conversation between Jesus and a mom. Matthew chapter 20, verse 20. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something. He said to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." Now, as you might expect, as we talk about this, we're going to end up looking at some criticism towards this woman today. Her name is Salome, by the way. But before that, we have to recognize a couple of good things about what she's doing. First of all, she trusts Jesus, and she recognizes his authority, right? She even believes that one day there will be a throne that Jesus is going to sit on, right? And not only this, but she's willing to approach him with boldness. She goes to him in front of everybody else to ask him this question for her sons. I should also mention, by the way, her sons are very interested in this as well. You'll see they interact in the conversation, and if you read this same story in the book of Mark, it talks about their interaction here too. But she's very brave when she approaches Jesus, right? So you might actually realize that her faith in that sense is strong. She has a strong faith in what Jesus can do. But the criticism that we have for Salome is not her faith. It's a couple of things that work together. First of all, it's her ignorance as to what's going on. And second of all, that causes her motives to get twisted. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's look at verse 22. Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said, this is the sons now, they said to him, "We are able." Okay, well, Jesus starts off here by pointing out her ignorance, right? You don't even know what you're asking for. She sees this as an opportunity to get her boys on the inside track to having the good seats up in heaven. I mean, wow, right? I mean, she's asking for number 2 and number 3 seats in heaven. That's pretty good, right? Aside from asking for Jesus' throne itself, she's asking for the second and third best spots. And she's probably thinking along the lines of riches, power, fame, more luxuries than someone could imagine in the throne room of God, right? I mean, that's kind of what she's probably thinking. And apparently, this ignorance is genetic because her sons are also participating in this. Okay, these boys are called Boanerges, which means what, church? The sons of thunder. Thank you, Lori. Boanerges means sons of thunder. Okay, James and John, that's what they're known as, the sons of thunder. Very big, boisterous Teddy Roosevelt type guys, right? They're always at each other's throats and stuff. and stuff like that. And so Jesus says, hey, sons of thunder, can you drink the cup that I am going to drink so that you can sit next to me in heaven? And they're like, yup. This family is having a little trouble getting up to speed. Here's the next thing you need to know, church. Ignorance prevents us from fully pursuing Christ. Ignorance prevents us from fully pursuing Christ. Now, again, these boys also have faith just like their mother did, right? They're not really thinking about what the cup is because to them the cup doesn't matter because they're sure whatever this cup is going to be, it's going to be worth it. I'll go through whatever I have to go if I can sit on your right or your left in heaven, right? Like, what could the cup possibly be that's something we wouldn't want to deal with? But the problem is they're assuming that whatever this cup is, not only that they're willing to drink it, but they think that they can, that they are able to. Now, if we go back to the beginning of this story, before the beginning of what we read today, Jesus had just said something to this group before Salome came up and asked him this. Here's what he said. We'll go back to Matthew 20:17. It says, and as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside, and on the way he said to them, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles to be mocked and flogged and crucified, and he will be raised on the third day. That's what this is describing the cup that he is going to drink. And then he calls these two, Boanerges, right, sons of thunder, and says, hey, can you drink this cup? And it makes me think, back when I was in high school, I knew there was a family of brothers that I knew that were like this. The three Hylack brothers. They were like the Bash brothers from that one hockey movie with the Bash brothers, whatever it's called. The three Hylack brothers were always playing hockey. They used to get like knives and like tape cardboard to them and like try to stab each other because that's what they did. And, shooting guns, wrestling, eating raw buff, I don't know, whatever they did. They were just crazy, all right? Always crazy. And I could see guys like that being with Jesus, being passionate, following him, and then being like, yeah, we'll do whatever it takes to get there because we're crazy like that. And I think that's what these guys are like. That's why they're called sons of thunder. They're just like, yeah, we can do this, Jesus. Just tell me and we'll be there. What's going to happen? I mean, Jesus just said what the cup is. He said, I'm going to be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, And they're like, yeah, we'll go with you. Okay, well, they're going to condemn me to death too. That's okay. You'll get us out of it. No, they're going to mock me and flog me, and they're going to crucify me. Okay, that sounds a little more rough, but we'll do that too, I guess. And then he says, hold on. I also said I'm going to be resurrected on the third day. Can you do that too? Church, that should have been a sign that they can't drink the cup, right? How should they respond to that? They should go, wait a second, we can't resurrect ourselves. Only God can do that. And then it would be like, bingo, you can't drink the cup then. You can't do it. Not to mention the fact that that cup also involves taking the sin of the world onto the shoulders of the one righteous one. Can the sons of thunder drink from the cup that Jesus is going to drink from? No, they can't do it. It doesn't matter if they're willing or not. But of course, they're not really picking up what Jesus is laying down here. So they say, yeah, sure, we're able. And so Jesus then has to go on in verse 23. It says, he said to them, you will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, for it is for those to whom it has been prepared by my Father. Now that's an interesting statement, right? Because I just told you that they can't drink from his cup. And then it's like, wait, but Jesus just said that they're going to. But notice what Jesus says there. He switches it. He says, are you going to drink from the cup that I drink? And then he says, you will drink from my cup. See, James and John can't drink from this cup on their own, but they can drink from Jesus' cup. And they would. Because the blood of Jesus had to cover the sins of James and John, just like everybody else. And it did. But they also have to do something that we are also called to do as well as Jesus' followers. And that is to participate in the suffering of Jesus, which is what they had to do. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. Jesus allows us to participate in what he has done. We all have an opportunity to participate in Christ's sufferings. Now, let me make this clear. You cannot die for the sins of the world. That's not what I'm saying. but we can suffer for his sake in this life. Peter tells us flat out to do this in 1 Peter 4:13. He says, "But rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed." Now, what are these guys going to end up having to do in order to suffer for Christ? Well, for James, his fate is spelled out in Acts chapter 12. He becomes the first one of the disciples who becomes a martyr. He dies by the sword at the hands of Herod. John is a little better off. He lived a very long life, even going on to write the book of Revelation around 95 AD. Probably even died of natural causes. However, he was beaten as a criminal, imprisoned on a work island, and survived being dipped into a vat of boiling oil. But hey, at least he didn't die, right? I mean, both of these guys had to suffer for the sake of Christ in different ways. And what's wild is the way that this went down. These men did what they did for Christ, but not in their own strength. That's really important to realize. Now, at this point in the story, right, they think they can handle it on their own. Like, yeah, I could drink from this cup. But do you know what happened when they were actually faced with the first time of going with Jesus to drink that very cup? Matthew 25:56, the second half of that verse there, it says, "Then all the disciples left him and fled." So they said they could drink the cup that Jesus had to drink. And the first step, the very first step of drinking that cup is when he was delivered over to the scribes and the priests. And the first thing James and John do, along with everybody else, is run away in fear. Even the first step that they thought they could handle on their own, they already failed. They were ignorant of their own abilities. Not only could they not handle the stuff that's impossible for anyone, they couldn't even do the first step. But the fun is not over for them yet. Okay, Jesus said, you can't drink the cup that I'm going to drink, although you will. In Matthew 20:24, it says, "And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers." So now he made everybody else mad. Right? Now that this has been asked of Jesus in front of everybody, all the other disciples stand up. But Jesus called to them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So these two boys, they want to sit by Jesus in the kingdom, right? They want to sit by his throne. And as soon as this is asked of Jesus, everyone else starts yelling at him. "Hey, what about us? Forget you guys, you selfish jerks, trying to take the good seats." Which isn't surprising. Salome wants something for her sons. The sons want something for themselves. And guess what? The rest of the disciples want the same thing. Right? Now, they weren't going to say anything. They wanted to do what was socially acceptable and sit there and be quiet and not, I'm humble, Lord, wherever you want me to sit, right? Until those guys say something, then it's like, well, wait a second. What about me? And instantly, the reality of their hearts and their motives show up. Which is kind of how we all are, right? Lord Chesterfield actually said this. He said, "Most people enjoy the inferiority of their best friends." You're laughing because you get it, right? It makes us feel good when others are beneath us. That's why we have rulers and politicians and managers or whatever, and they all fight to get to the top, right? Some people can't fathom a world where we aren't stepping on each other to get to the top of that ladder. Like, that's how it has to be. That's how I want it to be. I want to fight you. I want to step on you. Dog eat dog. It's just how it is. But then Jesus, when he looks at that, he flips it over and he says, no. You want to be great? It's not through power. It comes through being a servant. He says, you want to be at the top? Shoot for the bottom. Here's your next fill in the blank, church. A self-centered approach never points to victory. And Jesus even points out, guys, look at what I'm doing here. Jesus, the Son of God, right? He's like, I was sitting in the throne room of heaven, and now I'm on earth with you. I told you not to sin, and you did it anyway, so I came to die for you. You want me to cut down Rome, but guess what? I'm here to wash your feet. Jesus let go of everything for our sake. And he tells us that that's what we should be doing too. That should be our mindset. How can I let go of those things that I want so that I can seek and please him? How can I let go of everything that seems to benefit us here and now and focus on the things that God has for us instead? Or another way we might ask this question is, what happens when an airplane stops moving forward? Right? I mean, assuming it's not a Harrier or the Navy's F-35, it's going to crash and burn. Right? If an airplane stops moving forward, it's also going to crash. In church, our vision represents a model of living a balanced, Christ-centered life, which is what we should always be moving forward towards. Or moving instead of moving, whatever. We should be moving towards Christ at all times, right? Moving in that direction. We should be spending time in our church community, also time where we work, live, and play. And we should be growing, which overflows into serving always. This should never stop in our lives if we're being perfect, right? When is it okay to stop moving in the direction of Jesus? Never. And you might be thinking, but what about when I'm sleeping? That is growing during influence, right? You're not at church, but you are receiving the love of God through your rest, which He tells you to get. You're at home where you live, getting rest, which God gives us as an act of extravagant love. And you're like, what about driving? I definitely can't be moving towards Christ when I'm driving. Have you seen me drive? Have you seen them drive? It's like, well, if you stop flipping people the bird for a second and you start driving with concern for other people, all of a sudden, you're not moving away from Christ, you're moving towards Him. That is serving with worship during influence while you're driving to work or whatever. And you're like, but what if I'm not thinking about it? Well, first of all, start thinking about it. And second of all, work to develop the habits that will move you towards Christ even when you're not thinking about it. And you're like, but what if I mess up? Well, now that's the interesting point. What if I mess up? Guess what? You're going to, church. We're going to mess up. We're supposed to be moving towards Christ, but there are going to be times when we don't. If you get out of balance, it's okay. Change what you're doing so that you can get back into balance. There's nothing that we have to do outside of seeking Jesus in those four things. Nothing we have to do outside of those things. But let me ask you a question, and this is really important. Did Jesus have to deal with balancing these four things? Because we've been talking about this vision, right? Connect, grow, serve, influence. We talk about it. This is what we do. And it's like, but wait, is this what Jesus tells us to do? Or is this like Dan just picked four words that sound good together in a line, right? Well, no. Let me ask you this. When do we see Jesus intentionally cutting off time with connect in order to influence? When do we see Jesus intentionally growing at the cost of serving? Well, if you want to see a great example of Jesus protecting His connect time, how about when He was 12 years old and went missing? His parents started walking home, so they went back to Jerusalem to find Him. And here's how this goes. Luke 2:46. After 3 days, they found Him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard Him were amazed at His understanding and His answers. And when His parents saw Him, they were astonished. And His mother said to Him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And He said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" Think about it. 12-year-old Jesus, Mary and Joseph, they wanted to get back home. They wanted to get back to their time of influence, right? We got to go back to our normal lives. And they're like, oh, we forgot our son. Where is he? And even at 12 years old, Jesus is like, I needed time in godly community in the temple. Didn't you know, like, that's where I need to be? I have to set aside time to do this. I can't only be out there. I also have to be in here. He was in the temple. He was studying. He was essentially at church. Church itself didn't exist yet back then. But he was in godly community. And he was so invested that he stayed behind when everyone else was in a hurry to get out. But what about influence? Does he ever protect his influence time? Did Jesus ever have to push to make sure he had time out in the world? Well, Luke 4:42. And when it was day, he departed and went into a desolate place. And the people sought him and came to him and would have kept him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to other towns as well. I was sent for this purpose. Now, he was stuck there with these people that wanted to keep him there in their community. We want to keep learning with you. We want to keep this tight, godly community together. And he was like, yeah, no, I was here for that, and that's good, but I also have to go out. Yes, my time in a desolate place is needed. My time alone with God, my time with these people who already believe. But I also have to go over there where they don't yet know. I have to do that. Jesus certainly did not live in a bubble, church. He was all over the place going wherever he needed to go. Sometimes that was alone with God or in a synagogue or in a temple, and other times he was in people's homes or at weddings or sleeping. But then we have to ask, did Jesus also have to fight between his time growing and his time serving? Well, not only did he protect his own grow time when he was in the temple at age 12, he did it for other people as well. We all know the story of Mary and Martha, right? Jesus goes into their home. Martha's working. Mary's sitting there learning from Jesus. Or you might say Martha was serving and Mary was growing, okay? In Luke 10:40. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her." Jesus doesn't condemn Martha for serving, but he does criticize the fact that her obsession with serving distracted her from Jesus. Jesus wants Mary to grow. That way Mary would then have something to serve with later. And what about serve? Did Jesus ever push to make sure that he was serving? Matthew 12:9. He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And as a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" So that they might accuse him. And he said to them, "Which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And the man stretched it out, and it was restored healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how to destroy him. So the Pharisees, who were watching Jesus closely, remember, on the Sabbath, no man is allowed to work in any capacity, and these Pharisees made a lot of rules about that. And yet, even as Jesus is in the synagogue in front of every Jew in the community, where he's supposed to be not working, Jesus chose to heal. He chose to serve out of the abundance that he had, even though the Pharisees pressured him to stop with growing. Right now is grow time, not serve time. And Jesus was like, no, right now is time to serve. He chose to serve because it was the right thing, which tells us something, church. Your next fill in the blank. Jesus modeled a balanced life for us. Jesus was intentional about going after those four things and limiting them from being too much. And church, this brings us full circle back to our passage this morning. Salome and the sons of thunder sought to get more for themselves from Jesus, and Jesus said, "Serve others." The truth is, church, I showed you that picture of the gospel message at the start, right? And I said it was flawed because it was centered around the idea of me and what I get and where I go. But really, the gospel looks more like this. This is a much better illustration of it. You see, we have heaven and we have earth, and they're separated because of our sin. When sin came into creation, it was like, oh, the kingdom of heaven and earth have to be separated now because earth is full of sin. We cannot bring them together now. But then Jesus came, brought forgiveness and restoration, and now those things can start to blend, which is why we have that middle section up there with the cross. The cross is what brings the kingdom of heaven and the earth back together. And this is not something that just happens instantly, like, okay, now creation is perfect. We're eventually going to get there. In eternity, when there is a new heaven and a new earth, it will all be one, it will be connected, and it will be pure. But right now, Jesus has given a mission to his church that we are supposed to take that process and start bringing that kingdom of heaven to the earth for him, because he's the one that already opened the door, and he gives us a job to do. Now, ultimately, the work is done by God, but our God is so good and kind to us that he offers us a chance to be included in that process even now. Church, that's called sanctification. It's being set apart. When you become a Christian, before you were just flesh, just self-centered, just sin. But then when Jesus gets a hold of you, now you have a spirit. And the spirit opposes the flesh, and there's this wrestle. As long as we're here on this earth, we have the goodness of the spirit and the evil of our sinful flesh fighting each other all the time. And Paul talks about it in Scripture, his wrestle with it, his struggle, like, I keep doing the things I don't want to do because of that flesh that drags him down. However, the spirit that we have enables us to start bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth even now. And ultimately, the job will be completed because God is faithful and just to do so. And ultimately, things will be perfect. But now we get to start that work of sanctification on this planet even now. We have an opportunity to seek Jesus with connect, grow, serve, and influence. And so I want to close out with a question for each of you this morning. Are you spending enough time and resources into connecting, growing, serving, and influencing? The only way you're going to know is if you pay attention. Here's your last fill in the blank, church, and it's one we've used already in this series. To be balanced, we must take personal inventory. Seriously, do a self-analysis on yourself. Where am I at? You spend enough time in church connecting? Are you here Sunday morning? Do you come to our potlucks and our skate nights and our park days or whatever? Do you have friends in the church? And not just me, not, oh, well, I need to be friends. Are you friends with people in our church body? Do you know them? Do you spend enough time with God in church? But do you also spend enough time with God out in the world, influencing, where you work and live and play? Do you pray with your spouse? Are you discipling your children? Do you witness to your coworkers? Do you even know who your neighbors are? Do you also focus on growing in the Lord? Are you in a small group? Do you read the Word with your friends? Do you intentionally get enough rest in God when you need it? Are you growing? And finally, do you also focus on overflowing that into serving other people? Do you volunteer here on Sunday morning or during the week or whenever? Do you give generously to our church and maybe to other organizations as well? Do you actually love other people at a cost to yourself? Let me ask you this. Do you know what your spiritual gifts are? Because remember, church, God gives us spiritual gifts so that we can serve others, the church. And are you taking those spiritual gifts and using them for the benefit of God's people? Church, I can't answer those questions for you. And not everyone's balanced approach is going to look the same, but what will be the same, if you are healthy and you are balanced, each of those areas will be filled in a healthy way in your life. And they will be filled by what God is doing with you and working in you alone. And so, church, as I reflect on what we're talking about this morning, right? I mean, myself and the elders, we had a weekend. If you're a member of our church, you probably already know this, that we spent time together just talking about the direction of our church. And at the end of that meeting, I'm very encouraged, right? Because one thing that hasn't changed, when we look at our church and we ask questions like, why is this happening? Or what's God doing here? Or what's going to happen? No matter what, one thing we are confident in is that God is still alive and He's still working in our church. That has not changed, no matter what we're struggling with. And what's encouraging is that we have people in our church who are praying for our leadership as our leadership is praying and seeking God for the direction of our church. God is doing some good things in our church right now. And I'm excited to see what He's going to keep doing as He keeps moving. And my prayer for us is that we'll actually take a look at our church vision and that it will be our goal to live balanced lives for Christ. Not just because it's a good idea or because that's, I'm trying to follow the rules or something like that, but we sang these songs this morning declaring the holiness of God. God, you are holy, you are set apart. And if we're called to take a part in that holiness, then shouldn't we be seeking the life of Jesus as we do that? And so that's my challenge for us, church, that we would seek Him and balance what we're doing because we love God in response to how He first loved us.